Professor J.R.R. Tolkien is the grandfather of the modern fantasy genre. Whenever we think of anything in regards to any type of trope in fantasy, there is nearly a direct correlation to his original works, in both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And one of those things that has always existed is the idea of a greater evil. And whilst we do have Morgoth and Sauron, there is one type of evil that some argue is even greater than them, that being Ungoliant, the great spider of the world of Arda. The thing is though, this is not just some type of extraterrestrial greater evil. It represents something altogether different. Not just Ungoliant, but her and all of her sires, Shelob being the most famous example. And in them, they represent something different. It's something that is the idea of a evil femininity, if you will. Whilst we consider the great big evils of the world of Lord of the Rings and Arda, Morgoth and Sauron, they are both very masculine representations of evil. Ungoliant, however, is something rather different in its entirety. It represents a feminine type of evil, but something that is completely separate from Morgoth. It's not exactly that she is an evil version of Morgoth, but something altogether more sinister, one might argue. And like all things in Mr. Tolkien's world, it is very unique and worthy of its own admiration. Salutations Rangers, my name is Bradley and welcome to General of the Rings. And today's video we're going to be covering the stories of Ungoliant and her successors, what she truly means and represents, and at the end of it culminating in the idea of evil femininity, so that by the end of this video you'll know exactly what Mr. Tolkien meant when he described evil femininity. But without any further ado, let's go on with today's video. The story of Ungoliant is something that is connected to the story of the world of Arda and of itself. In the beginning, there was Eru Ilúvatar, the god of Arda, and he had the Eowyn or the great music of the Ainur. During that time, Melkor, his chief prince, created discord in the music, and was rebuked by Eru because of this. This then led him down on a dark rabbit hole, and he decided that he was going to become the chief antagonist and enemy of the Valar, that being the chief gods of the world of Arda. This would result in several different series of wars, clashes, and strife in the worlds of Middle-earth, involving all races, but mainly the Eldar, the elves. But our story takes place after his failed first rebellion. After this, he is sentenced by the Valar to spend 300 years in prison, after which he then presents himself before Manwë, chief king of the Valar, and repents of his actions. From there, the Valar, being merciful and gracious in equal measure, then invite him to rejoin the Pantheon, and he enters. However, deception and cunning is Morgoth's meat and drink. Thus, he plans to betray the Valar. More specifically, however, he plans to steal the Great Three Silmarils, crafted by Fëanor, chief and greatest craftsmiths of the Eldar. These were three mighty jewels of power imbued with the very essence of Arda. Melkor coveted them ferociously. In fact, the whole episode after this revolves basically around the Silmarils, hence why it's titled The Silmarillion, that being the story in which we get all this lore from. But to do so, Morgoth cannot stand against the Valar by himself. He tried that, and he failed, rather miserably to be frank. So he needs allies, so he goes searching for them. And lo and behold, he finds them. But in no Valar, for no other Valar would follow Morgoth. But Ungoliant was something altogether very different. The Eldar knew not from whence she came, but some have said that in ages long before, she descended from the darkness that lies about Arda. When Melkor first looked down into the envy of the kingdom of Manwë, and that in the beginning, she was one of those corrupted to his service. But she had disowned her master, desiring to be mistress of her own lust, taking all things to herself to feed her emptiness. And she fled to the south, escaping the assaults of the Valar and the hunters of Oromir. For their vigilance had ever been to the north, and the south was long unheeded. Thence, she had crept towards the light of the Blessed Realm, for she hungered for light, and hated it. In the ravine, she took the shape as a spider of monstrous form, weaving her black webs in a cleft of the mountains. There she sucked up all the light that she could find, and spun it forth again in dark nets of strangling gloom, until no more light could come to her abode, and she was famished. So truth be told, we don't exactly know what Ungoliant is. It's one of those greatest mysteries left in the world of Arda. But from this we can see that it's plausible that she could have been one of the Maya, the lesser Vala that was corrupted when Morgoth fell. But they had a falling out, and that led her to create her own thing. And what's really interesting here is that it's said that she is able to take light and turn it into darkness, aka dark webs, which is rather interesting. But I'm getting ahead of myself, we'll get back to that a little later. Morgoth and Ungoliant then strike a bargain. The bargain goes that if she helps Morgoth, Morgoth will allow her to feast on whatever her lust desires. Basically it translates to, if you help me, you can have whatever you want. But here, Morgoth will come to regret this decision, for he did not truly understand the depths of her hunger. During this time, Morgoth would be invited to a wedding, the wedding of Tulkas and Nessa, and here it's said that after the contentment, Tulkas became weary, and as Nessa sunk, he would fall into a deep sleep. Morgoth really did not like Tulkas. He was fearful of him. Granted, he was the only Valar who could feel fear, but Tulkas specifically drove a deep fear in Morgoth, with Tulkas being the champion of the gods. Basically, by Tulkas being asleep, it gave Melkor that edge that he needed to try and do something heinous. And what a heinous thing he would do, where he would slip out of the banquet and then meet with Ungoliant, and they would steal themselves into the city. From there, they would steal the Silmarils, killing Feanor in the process, but more importantly, wounding the two trees. And what exactly happened after that, not even Melkor could have guessed. Then, the unlight of Ungoliant rose up even to the roots of the trees, and Melkor sprang around the mound, and with his black spear he smote each tree to its core, wounding them deep, and their sap poured forth as if it were their blood, and was spilled upon the ground. But Ungoliant sucked it up, and going then from tree to tree, she set about her black beak to their wounds, till they were drained. And the poison of death that was in her went into the tissues and withered them, root, branch, and lead. And they died, and still she thirsted, and going to the wells of Arda, she drank them dry. But Ungoliant belched forth black vapors as she drank, and swelled into a shape so vast and hideous that Melkor was afraid. And here, this is one of the unexpected consequences. Again, it's unknown whether or not Melkor thought this would happen, but it is what happened. That being that the two great trees, the lamps of Arda, were completely destroyed, and the world was cast into darkness. From here, the jig would be up, and the Valar, realizing what had happened, would cause Morgoth and Ungoliant to flee across the ice bridge into Middle-earth proper. The result of this would be the creation of the sun and the moon and the stars, and thus the creation of the First Age. But once Morgoth and Ungoliant cross into Middle-earth, Ungoliant, in her manic, lustful desire, demands what was promised to her. She demands food. And Morgoth had stolen a great many gems. Now these gems are not gems as we think of them, rock formations. These are gems of power. Anything from the continent and the realm of the Valar is something that is so incredibly precious and potent that simply possessing it gives the user immeasurable power, let alone ingesting it. So, Morgoth feeds Ungoliant, jewels upon jewels upon jewels upon jewels, until, lo and behold, he has none left. None, save for the 3 Silmarils, that which is most precious to him. And as you can imagine, considering this is why all of this happened, Morgoth is very apprehensive to give these to Ungoliant, so he tries to keep them from her. But Ungoliant is not a creature of rationality, rather pure, unchecked lust. But Ungoliant had grown great, and Morgoth less, by the power that had gone out of him. And she rose against him, and her cloud closed about him, and she enmeshed him in web-clinging thongs to strangle him. Then Morgoth sent forth a terrible cry that echoed in the mountains. The cry of Morgoth in that hour was the greatest and most dreadful that was ever heard in the northern world. And the mountains shook, and the earth trembled, and the rocks were riven asunder. Deep in forgotten places that cry was heard. Far beneath the ruined halls of Angband, Balrog still lurked, awaiting ever the return of their lord. And now, swiftly they arose, and passing over Hithlum they came to Lanmoth as a tempest of fire. With their whips of flame they smote asunder the webs of Ungoliant, and she quailed, and turned to flight, belching black vapors to cover her, and fleeing from the north she went down into that dark valley that was thereafter called Nang Doragdeb, the Valley of the Dreadful Dead, because of the horror that she bred there. Of the fate of Ungoliant, no tale tells, yet some have said that she ended long ago, when in her uttermost famine, she devoured herself at last. And there, the tale of Ungoliant comes to an end. But not her legacy, for as it says, the valley was named the Valley of the Dreadful Dead, for the things that she sired there, that being her myriad of many children. Though, at the time of the Lord of the Rings during the Third Age, only one is known to still survive, that being Shelob, the spider who would settle in the pass of Kirath Ungol, and then provide an obstacle for Frodo and Sam to overcome. But that's the basic story of Ungoliant. And now, with that context, what I really want to get into is describing what this means. Ungoliant, as I mentioned before, is a type of evil femininity. It's one of the few great female evils that Tolkien has in his realm. Rather, it's what she can do. We see that time and time again, it is referencing both in the literal sense but also literally telling us she can take forms of light, consume them, and turn them into black vapors. This is interesting, because it's a type of creation, but via unmaking. It takes goodness, and it transforms it into something evil, malignant, horrible, the prime example being in Valinor. The sap of the two trees of life, arguably the greatest things ever grown at that time, was taken and belched forth into black vapors that covered her and empowered her to a point that even Morgoth, the Dark Lord, was truly frightened by her power. But even more so, it says that she took light and crafted it into dark webs to abscond her from the light. She took the power of light, but then created something to hide light from her. And ultimately her end is said that she was supposed to have died when she ran out of things to eat, so she ate herself. Light possibly being one of them. And here I want to come into what I really want to talk about, that being the nature of Ungoliant as an unmaker. When looking at the story of the Lord of the Rings, you look at the many powerful women, particularly from the Lord of the Rings itself during the Third Age, Galadriel, Arwen, Eowyn. They are all of a nurturing figure. Now, not nurturing in the traditional sense. When I use that word, I don't want you to think of it as what we understand in the modern concept. Rather, I want you to take it more holistically. When I say the word nurture, people immediately go towards child raising, and of course associating them with women, that's a rather obvious connection. But interestingly about those three, none of them are placed in a type of motherly role in the literal sense. Galadriel, yes, has children, but we don't really see or encounter them during the Third Age. But what I want to point out with those characters is that they are nurturers in the sense that they enable people to get to where they need to be. Aragorn would have never become king if Arwen did not support him. Arwen was arguably the only one who consistently propped him up as the king. She continuously nurtured him to get to a point where he could become the High King of the reunited kingdom of Gondor and Arnor. Without her nurturing him, Aragorn would have never achieved what he needed to be. Galadriel as well. She is often a guiding figure, terribly, terribly powerful, but choosing rather just to guide people. With gifts, with words, her discussions with Frodo as well help him understand what he needs to do. she is a subtle, nurturing figure. Eowyn as well. She nurtures Pippin in sort of the role of an older sister, seeing a kindred spirit in him, wanting to defend his homeland but not being able to for one reason or another. Thus, she nurtures him together with herself so that they both can fulfill their desires. Pure desires, mind you, which is rather important. All these women are nurturers, in that they allow people to become the best versions of themselves. They nurture them from one point to their final point. They are all good. They're creators, you could argue, because they are taking something, someone, for example, like Aragorn, who is less than what he's supposed to be, nurturing him and building him up, and in essence, creating High King Elessar. And this is not something that's just common to those three characters, but every single female character in Tolkien's works, every single good female character must be said, exhibits this type of nurturing. They're there to help. Just being around them in some cases, like the Valar, can literally change someone. And again, it represents that idea of what a woman should be, the goodness of a woman. I have a deep, strong relationship with my mother, and despite me being so incredibly old, when I get close to her, when I hold her, there is a unique type of comfort. It's this unearthly comfort. I can't describe it. It is completely foreign to me, but when I get it, it is something that is so incredibly comforting. And I can never recreate it on my own in any capacity whatsoever. It's something that is just magical, for lack of a better word. And I believe that's what Tolkien is trying to convey here. The fact that good women inherently have a comforting, nurturing feel to them. That simply being associated with them, you grow. You become a better person because of it. I imagine that many people of us can relate to the fact that being around good people makes you want to be a better person by proxy. And I feel like this is the greatest magnification of that ideal. But then that represents Ungoliant. Ungoliant is the exact opposite of that. Ungoliant is an unmaker. Ungoliant is the exact opposite of nurture. She's a destroyer. In every single story that we have of both her and Shelob, it is them destroying. They are beings of destruction, of unmaking. Ungoliant specifically takes light and twists it and manipulates it into webs of darkness. But she herself is a conundrum. She feeds on light, but she despises light. Therefore, she feeds light to produce dark webs to hide against the light, but then she requires light to live. It's an oxymoron. It's a conundrum. It's a question. What does this mean? What does this work with? How does this act? And I believe that this has some relation to her origin. She was, again, part of the Valar or the Maiar or the Ainur, and from there, she was corrupted, twisted, and changed, and so too was her nature. Corrupted, twisted, and changed. Tolkien uses a very specific word to describing her, and we get the word lust. It's interesting, it's not described as hunger, per se. Hunger is used, but the word we get time and time again is lust. She lusts for it. And again, it's one of those things where lust here doesn't mean in a sexual connotation, but rather it means in a verbal connotation, that being a deep, strong, and intimate desire. She desires food. She desires light. But it's abhorrent to her. Ungoliant is an oxymoron. She is an unmaker. But her nature as a female, as a womanly spirit, is supposed to be a maker, a creator, a nurturer. Yet because of her corruption or one reason or another, she is then the exact opposite of that, a destroyer. And I believe that this is the perfect example of good femininity and evil femininity in accordance to Mr. Tolkien's beliefs. Good femininity is nurturing. Simply being around them, being near them, being by proxy of them, you are made to be a better person, you're made to be a better man. But Ungoliant is something completely different. Just being near her makes you ill, rather than better. I want to focus on the black vapors. We know that Morgoth unleashed a black wind, something that swept over the land and literally had the power to kill people. It was a darkness. Darkness, when used in Tolkien's work, isn't something that is just a metaphor. It's a literal feeling of dread hanging in the air, a miasma of evil. I believe that Ungoliant has the capability to do the same thing. Even Shelob, when she settles in the pass of Cirith Ungol, yes, it's very close to Mordor, and one may argue that's the reason why that place is plagued. But I would argue that it's Shelob's very presence that exacerbates that plague. Because again, as we said, like with Ungoliant, she consumes light, she spins black webs, and she belches forth black vapors. It is my belief that every single one of us spawn does the same thing. Their unmaking is so unnatural to the world of Arda that it creates an area of unmaking. It creates death, harm, and pain. The story of Ungoliant and the dichotomy between good femininity and evil femininity is something very unique in Tolkien's works. And whilst many people question Tolkien and they condemn him for being too simple, for characters being too plain, I feel that that's something that's very, very unfair to say to Mr. Tolkien, because he leaves the grey to you. Many times we're given examples of great heroes and great villains. The grey being us, everything left in the middle. With that, it's up for us to decide what is grey and what isn't, and anything is in that spectrum. He shows us black, he shows us white, and anything in the middle, well, that's grey. And with the idea of femininity here, I think it paints a very beautiful picture. One being creators, nurturers, makers, versus Ungoliant, being unmakers, being evil, their presence breeding miasma rather than nurturing, taking light and turning it into darkness, versus in the other case, taking something that is relatively dark and muddled and shining it and producing it as something that's better. Now, of course, when discussing something like this, there is the modern issue, and regarding modern political sensibilities. But when it comes to something like Tolkien, I would ask that we take that aside. Rather, let's look at this from a holistic aspect. We are not specifically referring to men and women like ourselves. Tolkien notably hated metaphorical contexts like that. He hated allegorical stuff. He wanted his story to be something that anyone from any generation could relate to. So let's not apply our own generational biases and trauma to it. But rather, let's look at this for what it's supposed to be. The story of a great maker, great lovers, people who possess and show love and light, all the wondrous things that makes life worth living, versus someone like Ungoliant. Evil, death, miasma. Her sheer presence creates pestilence. It is the exact opposite of what a woman and what femininity should be. Women, by every definition, are creators, in any sense of the word. Something my father always told me is that you may get a house, but only with a wife will you have a home. And while some may argue what exactly that means, I think it means that for a man, a woman makes life worth living. They have this sense to create wonder, splendor, and joy around them. And it's something that is necessary for life. And that is what the women of Tolkien's will do, but to the nth degree. The elves and the Valar, they are the greatest example of that. And Ungoliant as a counterpart is the greatest unexample of that. Rather than love, joy, happiness, and home, you have death, miasma, decay, and destruction. And to me, it's a perfect example of both sides. Two very, very dark extremes, but perfectly encapsulated by every single thing that comes in the middle. That being us. So, in regards to Mr. Tolkien's work, like everything, it's very, very well written. And I really do love the contrast of makers and unmakers. It's a very relatively simple concept, but when put into the grander scale of things, it truly does make you appreciate what it means. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. This is my first foray into Lord of the Rings, and I do hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching all the way here. If you guys came from the other channel, hi, welcome, thank you. This is going to be something that's going to be coming once every week, hopefully, more or less. New format, new thing, a lot more in-depth. I hope you guys like it, and let me know down below. What are some other stuff you'd like me to cover? Any stories, anything in between? Basically anything regarding Lord of the Rings. I'm a massive Tolkien fan, and these are some of my favorite stories to cover. So yeah, whatever you guys want, I'll be here. So thank you so much for being here, Rangers. I love you and appreciate y'all. But I have been Bradley Bangadesan, the General of the Rings. You've been beautiful, awesome, amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all make sure to stay loyal out there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Now you see, normally Ungoliant was just a big bad evil spider, but no, in Shadow of the Mordor they had to make her goddamn goth mummy. So now I'm conflicted as hell.